Good evening and greetings from Cambridge. We're given a few minutes. I see numbers of people are still coming in. So we'll give it another minute or so and get started. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for joining us from Napoli, Università Partenope.
All right, Marco, if you want to, should we get going?
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on your time zone. Today, I want to welcome all the participants and speaker, Erin Scott, and all our friends from Sloan School of Management of MIT. The reason of this webinar is related to our collaboration with the Sloan School of Management, which will soon launch the first Master in Entrepreneurship and Innovation Management from Università Partenope in collaboration with the Sloan School of Management of MIT. This lecture today is basically the first lecture of our program. It's a sample lecture. It's going to be a short lecture compared to the normal lectures that we will have during our longer program. The program will start in January, and I hope that it's going to be a wonderful experience. It's one of its type in Europe because it's the first master targeted towards young graduates, compared to other experiences in Europe of the Sloan School of Management. So we target students who have obtained their bachelor degree or master degree, and we want to enforce the skills in entrepreneurial and innovation skills in our students. Also thanks to the collaboration with the Sloan School of Management of MIT. The admissions will be closed at the end of this month. So if you plan to be part of this experience, you should apply by the end of this month at the link of our main program at Università Partenope. But I don't want to take some more time from Erin and from Stuart. So welcome and hope you will enjoy this experience today. Thank you so much. Thank you, Erin. And Stu, it's
Great.
your turn now.
Thank you very much, Marco. Greetings from Cambridge, Massachusetts, and MIT, the Sloan School of Management. Our new program with Parthenope is one that we're very excited about. Not only is it a great school to be working with, but they have a history of working with us here at MIT Sloan, and especially in the area of entrepreneurship. The relationship started with their participation in the Regional Entrepreneurship Acceleration Program, REAP. And coming out of that, both sides really wanted to have a focus on what can we do to transform the economy of the Campania and Southern Italy region. So our faculty are very interested in application and real world application. The motto here at MIT, Latin, mens e manus, mind and hand. It's not just about the theory, it's about the practical application of the theory. And that is one reason why this partnership means so much to us. And we too are very excited about offering such an innovative program, the first of its kind, geared at the students that Marco referred to, but but specifically focused on entrepreneurship and innovation. It's such a critical thing at this time in the global economy. As part of this, we are going to host a series of global expert talks. And so today is an example of that, but also an example of we encourage you to apply to this program. And if you do, the type of classes that you can expect from MIT, both from our professors coming over to Italy. I have to tell you, we have a waiting list of people who are anxious to get to Naples, but also you coming here, and we look forward to welcoming you to the Boston area. And I really can think of no better way to start this than with Erin Scott. Erin is a senior lecturer in technological innovation, entrepreneurship, and strategic management here at Sloan. Her work focuses on uncertainty and strategic development in early stage ventures. She is in the true mens humanus mode, is somebody who mentors MIT startups and consults with ventures, especially within the broader ecosystem. She holds degrees from Vanderbilt and Washington University, where she got both a master's and a PhD. I note that her undergrad was in biology. So again, somebody who is bringing a range of experience, not just focused on management education, but understanding the sciences and some of the engineering that goes into the ventures. She has a global focus. Erin has taught for us with the Lisbon MBA, Fudan, and others, and is a very active advisor for our Visiting Fellows program, which we appreciate. I do want to note that the class, the snippet that you're going to see today is actually from an award-winning class. Erin won with her co-faculty Scott Stern the 2021 Innovation in Entrepreneurship Pedagogy Award. And that was awarded as one of the finest innovations in the area of entrepreneurship in this year. And you are now going to get to experience that. Also part of an MIT education is that we like you to be engaged. So you do have the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen and the chat. And we hope that you will be putting in questions as we go along. And we will have time after Erin's talk to be answering questions both about what she is presenting and about the degree program if you're interested. So Erin, I turn it over to you, and thank you so much.
Thank you, and welcome everyone. Just give me a moment here to get my slides and we will jump in. All right, thank you. Well, I'm really excited to speak with you all this evening. And we are very excited as well about this program. And so this is Tim the Beaver. And we look forward to welcoming you to campus if you join this program and learning a bit about entrepreneurship and innovation from our ecosystem. But I want to actually start with a different character than Tim the Beaver. And what I'd like you to do is I want you to kind of jump in the chat and tell me who you see here. Start the class with a pop quiz. Okay, I see two responses here. Oh, there we go. Yeah, Tamara is definitely capturing a little bit of it. So what you guys are probably seeing, and definitely what I saw the first time I saw this character, is Mickey Mouse. Right? There's just some familiarity to it, but you know that something is a little bit different. And I see that Rihanna has gotten it exactly right. So it's a little bit of a trick question here. This is actually Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. But this was, Walt Disney's one of his first characters. And so I want to tell a little bit about his path to entrepreneurship and to such a global impact and lasting impact as a way of really introducing kind of entrepreneurial strategy today. And so, as we know, Walt Disney was just incredibly passionate about cartoons and their power to tell stories. Even from the kind of the earliest days, he was pretty much sketching on anything he found. So this is when he was an ambulance driver, and you can see he was even doodling on the side of the ambulance there. as he, just incredibly passionate about this. But he also had this hypothesis that was actually quite counter to kind of the hypothesis of the time for cartoons. And in particular, though most people at the time viewed cartoons for adults, he actually viewed that cartoons could be a way of telling stories and entertaining the whole family, and not just adults. And so he kind of really set out to do this with Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. And he partnered with Charles Mintz to really move these kind of out into the ecosystem. And so he created these shorts, these small cartoons that would be shown in advance of kind of longer movies. And they were just incredibly successful, really proving out his hypothesis that cartoons could be entertainment for the whole family. And so as they continued to produce these shorts and they just continued to be a wild success, he really set out and he said, okay, I think I want a little bit more of this. I think I'm in a strong position. I'm going to renegotiate with Charles Mintz to really have more of this. And so what he did is he then, got on a train, goes to New York City to meet with Charles, and he views himself in a really strong position to really renegotiate this contract. And Charles looks him in the eye and he says, Disney, you're a mere entrepreneur. Not only that, you're a bad entrepreneur. And in particular, he said, if you had looked at the contract you had signed, you would know that it is I, Charles Mintz, who owns Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. And not only that, I'm going to go out and I'm going to, contract deals that are actually going to lessen or outright exclude this. Exclude you, Walt Disney. Moreover, as you've been on this train across the country to come here and renegotiate, I've hired away half of your team. And so as you can imagine, Walt is just incredibly frustrated by this. He has now pretty much been eliminated from the company and the idea that he really was the first to really see and build. And so he sets out back home on the train, maybe not this train, but he goes back on the train and he's just incredibly frustrated, but he's thinking, how do I move forward with my idea? And as you guys noted, this familiarity with Mickey Mouse is he looks at Oswald and he says, wait, what if I kind of shorten the ears a little bit, kind of change a few things? And at that moment, Mickey Mouse was born. But moreover, he really steps back and thinks about the decisions and the choices that he made for the company and how he can make them different. And so in his taking the team that remained and growing that team, he doubled down on bringing cartoons to the family, but also bringing forth kind of sound cartoons. And as you guys may know, right, Steamboat was the first to really move this out and prove this out. It was incredibly successful, but moreover, he really focused on making sure that he and his company really owned Mickey Mouse and owned the creative works that they created. Moreover, we see that foundation and the decisions around they made are still shape the company today. Right? And so there's this quote, I only hope that we never lose sight of one thing, that it was all started by a mouse. And still today, the Walt Disney Company is really built around the characters that they have created and really enforces strong ownership of those characters, all going back to his experience with Charles Mintz. So why am I kind of telling you this story to really start our discussion today is I want us to think about what our role is as entrepreneurs. It's not simply to come up with great ideas, but it's also to think about how we're going to implement those ideas. And in particular, how are we going to create and capture value from those ideas? This was the challenge for Walt was not just about this really groundbreaking hypothesis, but in choosing among different paths to move those forward. And so when we think about what is entrepreneurial strategy, and I'll provide a bit of an introduction and kind of the framework today, but at its core, entrepreneurial strategy is about choosing among alternative visions for your idea as an entrepreneur and the company that you seek to build, and the impact that you want to have on this world. And so let's step back and think about the advice that entrepreneurs receive when they are kind of thinking about moving forward their ideas. on one hand, the advice is you just kind of get out there and do it. Kind of get out there, kind of improvise, move forward, and get it done. And there's this kind of quote, a little bit unfair, kind of in taking it out, but here it says, if you're looking to become an entrepreneur, then don't waste your time going to university or business school. Just get on and do it. The challenge, of course, is you have to know singularly what path you're going to do, or said simply, you have to know what you in fact need to do. And the alternative advice is this heavy planning orientation. Let's take all of the really great tools that we have for large firms, and let's kind of apply it in the startup context. But these tools, while incredibly useful in certain contexts, can present challenges for being applied for entrepreneurs where there's high levels of uncertainty, right? How can we optimize in this kind of environment? And so this is kind of the paradox of entrepreneurship. How do we learn enough about alternative paths to figure out what strategy we should choose, what sets of choices we should make within this? And so I want to kind of walk through this and kind of why this is really important for entrepreneurs. And so the first is to think about, an entrepreneur with an idea. And so this we represent here with the light bulb, right? With if you look closely, you can see the filament is DNA there. And so it's you as an entrepreneur or an entrepreneur and their idea. And so if we were to kind of approach this as an investment decision and say, we could take this idea and we could pursue kind of this blue strategy here within this. If we viewed this as simply an investment decision, what we would do is we wouldn't just go all in on that blue path immediately. What we would do is we would do an experiment, right? We would do a small blue light bulb, a small experiment to learn more about this path. And if we got kind of positive news back from that blue light bulb, then we would fully commit to the blue strategic path. And this is the real options approach, right? Learning through staged investments that you may be very familiar with. And from the investment approach, right, we would deselect those ideas which we get negative information about. But I have a question for you. Even though this may be what investors do, what do you think entrepreneurs do when the blue light bulb or when they get negative information about a strategic path? Do they close up shop or do they continue going forward? See if anyone drops it in the chat. Absolutely, Mario. Exactly, they continue, right? And so even though they've learned kind of this negative information about the blue path, they don't in fact follow this approach of just closing down and focusing on other ideas. They changed, exactly, seeing this in the chat, right? Is they changed their strategy to continue, right? And so what we may see here and what you guys are telling me, right, is they say, okay, the blue path doesn't make sense, but what about the red path? Let's in fact do that within the red path. The same idea, but choosing another strategic route. The challenge with this approach and the situation that many entrepreneurs can find themselves, however, in, is that it's not as simple as we would hope, right? Is that when we've moved to the blue light bulb, we made certain commitments, we've hired certain people, we've made certain relationships, we've kind of created a certain brand, for instance, and all of that has moved us closer to the blue strategy, which is going to make it more difficult to learn about the red path. It's going to make it more difficult for us to, in fact, kind of not only learn about it, but move in that path. And so for an entrepreneur, as a result, if we think about kind of integrating strategy and experimentation, is that in these early days, choice matters. Is that, despite the kind of, we see that the entrepreneurs try to do both, that there are some kind of costs to this improvisation. There are some costs to this that actually mean that as you move closer to one, you are foreclosing other options. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about this as we move forward. But it was this kind of insight that really was very impactful to my colleagues and I. And so about 10 years ago, we really stepped back and think, what does the fact that really choice matters when you're sitting in the entrepreneur role versus perhaps an investment role? What does this really mean for entrepreneurs? And so along with my colleagues, Joshua Gans at the University of Toronto and Scott Stern here at MIT Sloan, we set about this research agenda as well as this practitioner and education approach. And it really comes down to kind of 6 words here. Choice matters, these choices matter, and these choices matter together. And so this, when you'll take the course with me and Scott, when you come here, this is what we work through. And this is what I'm going to kind of walk you through as an introduction today is this approach. And it kind of at its core is that entrepreneurial strategy really sets to resolve this paradox of entrepreneurship that I just talked about. How can we learn and kind of, but also not close certain paths? And so entrepreneurial strategy is the sequence of choices a founder or their team make to test specific value creation and value capture hypotheses when entrepreneurial experimentation requires some commitment, at least some partial commitment within that. And because this is so important, what I want to do today is talk to you a little bit about why this is the case for entrepreneurs within this. And so I'm going to walk you through kind of the axioms of entrepreneurial strategy. And so the first one is freedom, is that there is more than one potential path to create and capture value from an idea. And so I hope we've already started to see that when we talked about Walt Disney, or when we kind of think about our own ideas and how we might move them into the world to create impact. But I want to start with perhaps a more recent example than Walt Disney, which is Starbucks coffee. And in particular, when Starbucks was founded, they had this idea, this hypothesis of how they could create value for American consumers. And that hypothesis is that Americans drink really bad coffee. And so what they set out to do was bring quality beans to Americans so that Americans can make kind of better coffee in their homes. And one of the first things the founders of this company did was they hired a gentleman named Howard Schultz, and they sent him to Italy. Because no doubt, if you want to learn how to make good coffee and to really understand good coffee, there you should go, as I'm sure this audience can attest. And so Howard Schultz, I think, has one of the best gigs. He gets sent for about a month to go to Italy to really understand coffee and to explore different coffee beans. And he comes back to his employers and he says, guys, I think you've gotten it all wrong. It's not, as much about the beans. The beans are important, but really if we're going to introduce this, to, coffee, better coffee to the United States consumers, what we really need to do is we need to introduce these cafes. It's really about that experience. It's a full experience. And, he really wants to set up an experiment and have a few of these cafes. And the team looks at him and they say, no, just focus on the beans, do your job. And so he steps back and then he decides, no, I'm not gonna listen to them. And so he turns 2 of their storefronts into cafes, where he opens up and he really tries to kind of embrace what he saw during his travels in Italy. And there are lines kind of around the block. This turns out to just be incredibly successful experiments. And so he goes back, after a few weeks, and he goes back to the team and he says, I know you told me not to do this, but I went ahead, I leaned into, entrepreneurship and I did an experiment, and it turns out this is successful. And what do you think? What do you guys think that the founders of the company told him? Let me drop it in the chat. So tomorrow, we're hoping that they say, thanks, great job. That's a wonderful idea, and great for doing this experiment. I like it, Francesco is saying, crazy but brave, absolutely. But what they say is, are you crazy? You've just made our core customer, those that want to buy the beans and the equipment, and you've made them wait in a really long line for this experiment, and they fire him. They say, this is not the vision that we have for the company. You're not kind of following direction within this. And so what he does is he in fact founds a different coffee store. And he said he really believes in that this path really holds the kind of key to it. And so he starts opening up these cafes, as we know, slowly across the country and then later across the world. he in fact later, which I think you all might be kind of cueing into, is he in fact buys the Starbucks brand from them and really builds this out. And so what I want to point out though is that clearly this path was successful. We see kind of Starbucks really is taken off and expanded. But what I also want us to see is that you may think, oh, those folks who were really all about the beans, they really missed the mark, right? That maybe that was the bad path. But it turns out those are in fact now the founders that you may know of Peet's Coffee, which has continued to embrace really being about the beans. They also have stores, but really focusing even still today about the beans, and have been incredibly successful themselves. And so just thinking about that, right, is that the fact that, there is more than one potential path to create and capture from an idea. And so we see that in the founding story of Starbucks and Peet's Coffee. At the same time, compared to a large firm, an entrepreneur cannot pursue all of these paths at the same time, right? They have to they have to pick one, at least temporarily. And why is that? Partially that is, right, time commitments, resource commitments, financial commitments, but it can also be a bit more. And so you guys are probably familiar with The Body Shop. They are, Anita Roddick founded The Body Shop really about this hypothesis that consumers would really care about all natural, sustainable, beauty products. And while I think today we see a lot more of this category of products, at the time it was actually quite revolutionary. And she slowly really built this company up. And at some point, folks said, it's great that you really have gotten these consumers, but for certain products, we think you should do animal testing. It's just going to be a little bit more efficient for you. You'll have, better products if you do that. And she really understood that as I think she said, is like, you can't be the company that's against animal testing, except part of the time. Absolutely, Paula. It's like the Lush of the old times. Absolutely. I like that Lush comparison. And so if we think about that, there's this constraint, not just financial, not just your time, but also the strategic constraint about which path are you going to pick. And kind of choosing to one is going to really foreclose these others. And so you have this freedom, but you're constrained as an entrepreneur. Moreover, you have this kind of high level of uncertainty. And that uncertainty is not just the value about the particular strategies, but also the range of values that might result from the idea itself, right? And so kind of how do we choose among these different paths? And kind of one way to kind of think about this was to think back to the founding of Amazon.com. So Jeff Bezos at the time was working on Wall Street. His boss came to him and said, I think the internet might be a thing. Go write up a report and find out how this will really impact our industry. And so he did a careful kind of study of this and kind of put an analysis and really put forward a path where kind of online trading by consumers. But then he stepped back and he said, if this is really going to revolutionize our industry, how might the internet affect other industries? And he actually developed multiple plans really thinking about that before he really decided to focus on consumers and books within this. And so kind of high levels of uncertainty. And then there's also noisy learning, right? And so, it's difficult. So even if we conduct kind of experiments in these early days, the learning is noisy and ongoing. And so finding about one route often allows us to learn about alternative routes as well. And so one, company here close to home, a recent Sloan startup, can really saw this in action. And so Heidi Zach had this premise that, that in fact, women needed a better way to purchase undergarments that appropriately fit. And so she had this kind of technical solution that would allow women kind of very tastefully to wear, a white shirt and use their phone, and their phone would tell them kind of the right size that they needed. But when she did that kind of study and that really early experiment, that experiment not only taught her about kind of the value of that path, but moreover, it actually told her that actually sizing more broadly was incorrect. And in that in particular, there were kind of half sizes that should be there that were in fact missing. And so, in thinking about this and really surfacing this, actually she and her husband have created Third Love. That's actually one of the largest now in that category, based on that process. And so when we take, and you kind of put those together, that we have a lot of freedom as entrepreneurs, we're constrained, there's high uncertainty in really understanding the different paths, and there is limited and noisy learning, that is kind of the paradox of entrepreneurship. And that is kind of what we're wrestling with, is that choosing between alternative strategic commitments really requires knowledge that it can only be gained through experimentation and learning. And yet the path, this process of learning and experimentation inevitably results in at least some commitment that's going to foreclose some of these strategic routes. And so that is really, why we really set out to really think about and wrestle with how can you as entrepreneurs really make active choices to really create the kind of firm and impact that you want to have in the world. And so kind of as we move forward and kind of in our work, what we find is that there are kind of 4 key choices that you as entrepreneurs need to make. Which customers are you going to serve? How are you going to innovate? How are you going to organize? And with whom and how are you going to compete? And that taken together, these really reflect different value creation and value capture hypotheses. And so what I want to do today is just talk a little bit about that choice of customer, right? This is the most salient choice for many entrepreneurs, is kind of which customer are we going to kind of choose? And so an example of folks that have not chosen a customer is kind of here we have Pratt's Healing Ointment for man and beast, right? If you're serving both man and beast, you haven't in fact chosen a customer. And yet many entrepreneurs kind of go out into the world and they kind of just see who's going to kind of purchase it. And then that's going to be kind of the set of customers. And so we want to take a little bit more of a thoughtful kind of approach on who is our customer itself. And so this is what we call the beachhead customer, that early customer. And so a lot of focus on entrepreneurship is in fact on that beachhead customer, because it's so incredibly important, right? It's the search for this ideal beachhead that really is going to allow you to grow and serve the mainstream market. And this is really so important that in addition to spending time on entrepreneurial strategy, you'll also be spending time with kind of Bill Ouellette as part of this program, or kind of MIT. And a lot of what Bill is going to teach you is thinking about how to really get that first customer and that beachhead customer, because it's so important. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about then that choice of which beachhead before you kind of think through how do I in fact capture them. And what I want to do is kind of walk through this with a really kind of innovative company that we've seen over the past 10, 15 years, which is 23andMe. And that company was really founded to take advantage of the introduction and the learnings from the Human Genome Project, and in particular the ability to to sequence human DNA much faster and less expensive. And so the founders really considered a number of different beachhead markets that they might consider. And we were fortunate to have those folks here a few years ago to really talk about that early process and the decisions that they were thinking about. And they said that there were in fact 2 different beachheads that they kind of considered. One was a very consumer-focused product, really focused on ancestry research, including unknown relatives and surprising traits. And another didn't focus on consumers, but instead focused on working with physicians and the government to enhance prenatal genetic screening. But think about if you were the CEO of this company. You were founding this company and you chose one path versus the other. As you can see that would reflect very different early hires that you would make. One might be more geneticist, one with more consumer focus. Another might be physicians and those who have experience in working with the government around regulations. Not only that, but how you would evolve that technology, how you would develop it within it, and kind of who you would be competing with be subtly different. And what they learned that was like picking one path was leaving the other behind temporarily, and in fact, much longer than they in fact imagined. And we see this with many ventures, and in particular in our framework, and kind of thinking about it is that the choice of a beachhead is in fact the choice of the mainstream market. So choosing kind of one is beachhead is choosing one mainstream market versus another kind of another. And so that we see this choice matters and kind of thinking about that the value of that beachhead itself. And this same reframing when thinking about why choice matters, it turns out is going to be incredibly important. And we're going to see a similar logic. And when we think about kind of which technology you're going to use, how you're going to develop that technology, as well as how you're going to develop that technology. We're going to also think about that and how you choose your co-founders and which resources and capabilities you decide your organization will really invest and build in versus kind of buy in the market. And last, and thinking about with whom and how you're going to compete together. And in particular, while you don't have the choice of having no competition, you really have this choice in thinking about how you're going to compete itself. And so when we think about these choices together or individually, we see that choice matters. But as you guys are probably already thinking, these choices also matter together and reinforce each other. Not only do how they interact reflect different value creation and value capture hypotheses, but they in fact represent different strategies. And so as we introduced in our HBR article from 2018, that this is in fact when we organize around the choice of competition with the entrepreneur and their idea front and center, we in fact see 4 different common strategies for startups: an intellectual property strategy, an architectural strategy, value chain strategy, and a disruption strategy within this. And what is really interesting is this is a compass, not a map. And so you as an entrepreneur with your idea, in fact, can choose to take this in multiple paths. And so working with, I think together we worked with over thousands of startups who have used this toolkit. And what we see is that for most entrepreneurs, they're able to service multiple different paths using kind of this canvas. And each of these strategies reflect different sets of bundles of choices and different value creation and value capture hypotheses. And you're able, and by being very clear about this, you're really able to quickly surface a strategy for your idea within this. But moreover, if you really take seriously this paradox of entrepreneurship and why choice kind of matters, you should not stop there, having put together kind of one strategy. In fact, what we want you to do is actually, the moment that you've surfaced one viable strategy, is actually to generate 1 or 2 more that also make sense. Not only is that really proving out kind of the value of these different strategies, it's helping you really test out your assumptions and clarifying the discrete choices that those strategies reflect. At the same time, the moment that you've really come up with 2 or 3 different viable strategies is the moment that you have to make a choice. You have to leave behind, at least temporarily, those other strategic routes and really fully commit to one strategy to give it that best chance of really realizing the value that you can create. And so kind of in the course, just to tell you a little bit more about this, we really move through in a very practical way, thinking about this approach. So we've walked through those 4 key choices. What are the areas of domain along these choices? Then we think in depth about kind of how do we think about choosing and also experimentation and testing in the entrepreneurial context before moving into these different strategies and what are the kind of the nuances and the trade-offs of the different strategic routes before putting it together to really applying it to your ideas itself. And so we work through a number of case studies that are with real startups that we have worked with here in the ecosystem and around the globe, and putting this into practice. And we've developed a number of tools and kind of a workbook and a set of framework that allow you to put this together for your own ideas itself. And so just to really kind of wrap up so that we have time for questions here, this is just a little bit of a taste of the framework and the approach that we have with entrepreneurial strategy. When we kind of bring you to the campus, as I've mentioned, be highly interactive and really working and putting this into practice. But I hope you take away today is that the power of entrepreneurship is the ability to not only identify and implement exciting opportunities, but to really make those choices that allow you to create real value for the world and capture value for your stakeholders such that you're able to sustainably create this impact that you see. And that experimentation and learning are fundamental to the evolution of any new venture. And so, improvisation is definitely part of entrepreneurship, and as is experimentation and learning. But that what we found in both our research and in practice is that the value of experimentation is far higher when really guided by these strategic priorities, and allows more effective staging of these commitments that I've previewed today. And then more generally, because entrepreneurs have more freedom, but fewer resources and are constrained, the marginal returns to strategy are higher for entrepreneurs than they in fact are for established businesses. So thank you guys all, and thanks for your engagement in the chat. Please go ahead and drop some questions. If you have any for me kind of about this framework, moreover, if you have some questions about the program, I look forward to welcoming you all to Cambridge in the years to come.
Thank you so much, Erin. That was fantastic. My video is not working. I like your idea of a compass. Can you say a little bit more about why it's a compass and not a roadmap?
Yes, thank you. So I think that a lot of entrepreneurs often view that the choices they need to make are kind of really constrained by the environment that they are in. And so that there's kind of one true path to taking that idea and moving it out into the world. What we have found in working with a lot of entrepreneurs along this path is that in fact, for a given idea, there are multiple paths that they could take. And so part of the challenge for entrepreneurs is not only surfacing that those are distinct paths and what the choices really reflect, but that they actually have to make a choice. They have to kind of move forward with one or the other. And so we see within this compass that there are kind of 4 common strategies that we see that startups take: this intellectual property strategy, architectural, disruption, and value chain. And that these are in fact very different sets of choices within this. But that I think that one thing that is often surprising to folks when they first see this compass is how most ideas can really be used and brought forward on multiple of these paths. And so for entrepreneurs kind of stepping back and saying, I'm pretty sure I'm committed maybe to an IP where I'm going to license this idea out, but let me kind of step back actually and think temporarily about what those other paths, even if they decide to go all in still on the IP path, in that process, it really crystallizes those choices themselves and helps them learn and test more about the idea itself.
Hi, Erin. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. Very stimulating and very interesting. I have a question for you. How do you think the entrepreneurial approach may fit and support established corporations?
Thank you, Marco. That is a question we've been increasingly getting from folks that we work with, as they think about how this might work in kind of an entrepreneurial environment within their own corporations or more broadly within the corporation. And while, as we've talked about, we really set out in building this framework, really thinking about the entrepreneur themselves. But what we have found is that is actually pretty powerful in entrepreneurial activities as well, in part because it really allows folks to really think in a concrete way about the different paths that make sense, and then what are those choices and what are the trade-offs on those different paths, such that they can choose the best one for a given idea that really align with the company's broader objectives. And so we are seeing more and more that folks are really adopting this when they take it back to their companies.
Thank you.
You would, there's a question came in, but I also wanted to ask, you said that you made a reference to thousands of companies. So this isn't just a US thing. This is something that you've been looking at internationally, or is it primarily a US focus?
Thank you. That's a great question. So we've worked with startups from around the globe. So this is being adopted more broadly, but this is, we're a global team and working in this in a number of different ecosystems more broadly. I would say as well, we're working, I see this question with, are you going to have exposure to companies and budding startups? Absolutely. And so kind of one thing that we really take advantage of is really showcasing a lot of the startups that we've worked with, but also the strategic challenges and trade-offs that they've had to make as founders and how they kind of thought through this. And so all of our cases are really capturing those budding entrepreneurs at the moment of those early choices. And they're written at the times that we actually don't know quite how they, which path they will take. In part, sometimes they like listening to the feedback from the students and kind of highlighting different trade-offs that they may face as they're kind of making that active choice. And so we've worked with a number of different startups, many that we will highlight in the course, with the cases, with visits. As well, we've worked with a number of different startups through the Martin Trust Center here. Scott Stern is faculty director of the center. And then Joshua Gans is heavily involved with the Creative Destruction Lab, which works with startups in Toronto, but also around the globe as well. And then we also separately just work with a lot as mentors or in consulting roles.
Yeah, if I can just add on to that, Erin, very much that's a great answer about how we bring into the classroom that practical experience. But if you're asking about the degree program itself, very much so part of the 3-week visit here to MIT won't just be in the classroom, but it would be visiting the companies. You'd have the opportunity to be going to the Trust Center, having some exposure to the Delta V teams, which is a startup competition here on campus, and other things. So you very much that exposure. And Marco, you might want to touch on, I think that's part of your vision of what you'll be doing on the ground there in Naples too.
Yeah, sure. We will also be banding firms, startups during the course. There will be specific fractions of the course where students will be accompanying, supporting startuppers in their growth process. So basically there will be parts after the experience at Sloan, the Global Immersion Program. We will organize a period of time in which teams of students will work with firms and startups full time.
Erin, there's a question of should entrepreneurs focus on the idea they have or the needs of the customers? Step one, right?
Absolutely. And I love this question. This is a question we get quite a bit with students, or folks come in my office and say, I have this idea, but what should I focus on? And so we think of in where we will start the class is really thinking about the choice of opportunity that you as entrepreneurs have. And so I would say kind of first and foremost, kind of a necessary condition for entrepreneurship is that you need to have a hypothesis about how you will create value for those customers, right? How you will create and kind of capture value. But the nice thing about being an entrepreneur, right, is actually, and what we use as kind of the second and third criteria in deciding which opportunities you should choose, is that kind of second, you want to have really valuable experience that will allow you to really realize and actually create and capture value from that opportunity. And you also want to have not only just relevant experience, but also passion for that idea itself. So I would say it's not an either or, it's really a both. And so how we kind of think about different opportunities really ultimately allows us to choose an idea that really realizes our own passions and kind of impact that we want to have in the world. And we find that really starting with that framework then helps us think later on about which strategic path you should in fact choose as an entrepreneur. And I would just say, kind of going back to kind of an earlier question, we really work through this, not only with the cases, but really work through this in in really impact-oriented way with folks in the classroom. So you will use these toolkits with your own ideas to help you really surface different paths going forward.
Right. Great, thank you. I noticed, Venkata, you raised your hand. Actually, if you could type your question in, because we're limited in be able to hear you. But there is another question about what is meant by the architecture strategy. And given all that Italy has contributed to architecture in the world, I don't think we're talking about the same thing, but can you say a little bit more about that?
Yes, thank you. So, we think about these different strategies and they're oriented around this choice of competition, these choices of competition. And let me compare it maybe to some of the other strategies. So an IP strategy is really focusing on kind of collaborating, but also controlling. You often see that in licensing. A disruption strategy, we kind of classically see that in entrepreneurship, where that is heavily focused on competing head-to-head with the incumbents and focusing on really getting ahead and staying ahead type of an approach. Whereas, kind of opposite that, we see a value chain strategy, which is also kind of getting ahead and staying ahead kind of approach, but is in collaboration with the kind of incumbents that we might see. An architectural strategy is perhaps the most ambitious of the strategies that we really see. And that is where you're focusing on competing with the incumbent and also focus heavily on control. And that's really where you're setting out to architect an entirely new value chain, or rearrange the value chain in a new way that you control, your company controls the key kind of bottlenecks. And so just as an example is, while not all platforms are architectural strategies, many platform plays that we see or that you may think of, such as Facebook or others, are attempting an architectural strategy. And so in the class, we go through each of these strategies in depth and with a number of examples, and then of course cases on and what are kind of the sets of choices and what are kind of the common kind of pitfalls that entrepreneurs find themselves within.
Great, thank you. I'm putting in the chat the link to the degree program. Again, I think it was put in at the beginning. Encourage you that if you were interested in what you heard today, I encourage you to go to that site. I know the folks from Parthenope would be more than happy to have greater conversations with you if you want to contact them directly. Erin, it's great. It's funny. One of the great things about working here at MIT is I get exposed to this stuff all the time. But what I think is really amazing is I've heard you lecture a few times. I've heard Scott Stern lecture a few times. But I always learn something new. And I think that's just one of the fantastic things about it is, what you guys do does not remain static. That I think, as you were referring before, like you're constantly bringing in, new ideas or examples or lessons learned from the companies that you're working with. And that's just part of the dynamic nature of the ecosystem here in Cambridge, but I think really we're also trying to help create in Naples. Is that hard to do? Be that dynamic?
It is, but I think I would say two things. That it is one, it is our kind of focus, is that ultimately in the end of the day, this is about really building robust set of tools that really allow the folks that are on this call that are very passionate about a set of ideas and really want to move that forward and kind of change their own ecosystems and really change the world. We really want to set down and really empower them. And so it constantly kind of iterating and really improving those tools is just part of that. And then kind of separately, I would say, Stu, that you always say that, these global programs, and when we think about all we can do with the folks here on the call, is it's a two-way conversation. And so we really love when folks come to our ecosystem and share what they're doing in their ecosystem. And we learn from that. That is a two-way conversation. And that makes our ecosystem stronger. And we hope that it contributes to the entrepreneurial ecosystems around the world. And so we really make sure, that we set aside time to really have those conversations and have those, not just the formal time, but really those things that coming together really creates. And that's particularly powerful, I think, for entrepreneurship.
Right. I agree. It certainly is part of our system. Keeps in keeping with our mission statement of developing principled innovative leaders. Certainly, we're education, and you're right, that is a two-way conversation. But that leads to the second part of the mission, which is advancing management practice, and what we learn in the classroom very much is part of that. And it's one of the reasons why Marco and the team at Parthenope we're so excited and looking forward to starting this. We've started the partnership, but to starting with the students and in the classroom to make that happen. Because when we say develop principled and innovative leaders, that's just not our degree program students. That's everybody that we work with, and we look forward to welcoming you. If there aren't any other questions, Marco, do you have any final thoughts?
Just what I can add, but very short thought, is that starting from the experience that we had through REAP, which is a program from the Sloan School of Management that we used as a seed of our project, the the project that we are presenting today, the main master, basically many things have changed in our region in terms of development of an entrepreneurial ecosystem. We have increased dramatically the number of startups in our region and in our city. We have created a network of accelerators that now host many startups and many companies that are growing, and also the interest of venture capitalists that have usually neglected Italy, not only Italy, but Europe in general, Southern Europe in particular, have started investing significantly in Southern Europe. This means that we will take advantage of the changes that have occurred since 2017, 2018, to involve in our program such experiences of startups and have the opportunity for our students to work with them if they don't want to start their own company, of course, and to work them, embodying them and supporting them in their development process. So everyone is welcome. Napoli is an incredible place. Cambridge as well. So it's a great opportunity for whoever wants to join this adventure to better know these incredible cities and these incredible universities, and in particular, of course, MIT will be an incredible experience. For those who have not been there, 3 weeks there are will just get you excited so much that you want to get back immediately after. You don't want to come back. So thank you, Erin. Thank you, Stuart, Jacqueline, and to all the participants. Thank you for your presence today.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I would note there was a question about international students. I would say go to the website and that'll give you the contact information, and Marco and the team will be happy to follow up. That is something they are looking for. This is not just an Italian program. And Erin, the final question was, what's the one area of expertise does an entrepreneur need? And I'm going to volunteer the desire to learn. Is that one you would agree with, or do you have something else?
Absolutely. I think both in the startups that I worked with and in studying the histories of so many startups, that taking a step back and really being a continual learner is key to startup success. Great.
Well, again, thank you, Erin, for your time, and everybody at Parthenope. This was, I think, a fantastic start to our expert talks, and we look forward to the future ones. And again, Erin, thank you for starting on such a wonderful path.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all.
Ciao, everyone.